right, hello everyone and welcome back. This is part 3 of this custom steel gravel bike video series that I started about a week ago. So what we're going to talk about today, today's topic is we're going to cover high trail versus low trail. And I also want, at the end, I just want to briefly mention about the difference of riding knobby tires and slick tires. We're back to the knobby tires, so we went from the gravel bike configuration to the rando bike configuration, and now we're back to the gravel racing bike configuration. So I do have the knobby tires on here, and I want to talk a little bit about just the difference in how the knobby tires handle on the fast paved descents with switchback turns. So that'll be at the end. So today what I want to talk about is low trail versus high trail. And there are a lot of videos out there that talk about this. And so many of you probably already know, but for some of you who don't, basically what trail is the number that defines how a bike will steer, how well it will steer. And that's just a very kind of, I don't know, that's a very oversimplification. But the bicycle trail is often referred to like a shopping cart, the front wheels of a shopping cart. And when you're looking at a shopping cart, you see the two front wheels, they're casters, and they have a very high trail. And the reason they do is so that when you're pushing your cart, both of those two front wheels will trail behind the steering axis of the shopping cart. And that way it makes it easy to push the cart and steer it through the grocery store. On a bicycle, it's harder to see the trail because you have complicated angles and offsets with the bike frame. So you have the head tube angle, you have the fork offset, and you have a very large wheel. So it's hard to actually visualize that there is a trail happening here, that the wheel is behind the steering axis. And so bikes that have, what is trail figures? What are some of the numbers? So let's put those out there first. So the trail of a bike runs on a spectrum. You have low trail all the way to high trail. And within that spectrum, there are an infinite number of trail numbers that you could possibly have. And it depends on the head tube angle, the fork offset, and the diameter of the tire and wheel assembly. So the rolling diameter. And there's a thing called a pneumatic trail, which we won't get into, but it's same basic principle, but it figures in the fact that there's some deflection of the tire when it's it's a pneumatic tire, so there's a little bit of deflection, and that can change the trail a little bit. So, but aside from that, what happens on the trail of spectrum, or the spectrum of trail, you have the low trail bikes, you have the mid trail bikes, I guess, and then the high trail bikes. Most bicycles are around 60. That's kind of the target for most road and touring, and pretty much most bikes, they try to find that middle trail number around 60. So 55 to 65. That's where I'd say a good at least 80% of the bikes out there fall in that. On the upper end of the trail, you have the mountain bikes and some of the downhill bikes and stuff where you need really stable handling. Also, you want that front wheel to be really far out in front of you so your center of gravity over that front tire will be more favorable on a steep downhill. But for most bikes, that's way too far. It's not necessary. So they kind of pick a trail somewhere between 55 and 65. Then come these randoneering bikes. They suddenly show up in the kind of mainstream bicycle world, and all of a sudden everyone's talking about low trail bikes and the benefits of low trail. And so what is low trail? Low trail is where, as I said, the steering axis, the contact patch of the wheel. So before we go into that, let's exactly define what trail is mathematically or geometrically. So geometrically, here's this bicycle here, and I'm going to put it up like this so you can see it. So on a bicycle, you have the head tube angle. That's this angle, and it is running on some degree less than 90, and it points to the ground. If you draw an imaginary line through the center of this head tube and you pointed it all the way to the ground, the point on the ground, you can see where my finger is, that is where the center axis of the head tube points. Then from there back to where the tire is actually touching the ground, that dimension is the actual trail. Okay, that is the trail. So a low trail bike has a shorter dimension. So the wheel is effectively trailing behind the steering axis less, which makes it a little less stable. Okay, so now that we know what trail is, why would anyone want an unstable low trail bike? Well, there's a couple of reasons why we're starting to see these bikes show up. Probably the biggest reason is toe overlap, and the other reason is to be able to carry a front load. And the reason toe overlap is an issue is because oftentimes you will see these low trail bikes out there, they have fenders on them. So the fenders effectively make the diameter of the wheel even bigger, which exacerbates the toe overlap. And toe overlap is when you're pedaling your bike along and you get to that forward position where where your crank is the most horizontal and you have your toe out there, and your front wheel, you try to steer around a steep turn and your front toe interrupts or bumps into your toe with the front tire. And for most people, it's just a nuisance, really. I mean, most of the time it's not a problem. Most bikes have a little bit of toe overlap, so it's not an issue for most riding. It's only become kind of discussed because some people are now riding off-road more and they're taking steeper turns and steeper switchback trails. And so on those rides, toe overlap can be kind of a problem. You're pedaling up a hill and you go around a 180-degree switchback, you might bump your toe on the wheel as you're trying to pedal around that turn. But most bikes, when you're riding, you're going down a hill really fast and you're leaning into the turns, and the steering of the front tire is very minimal, if anything. So really the steering comes from the lean in your hips. It's not really because you're articulating the handlebars that much. So trail itself or toe overlap itself is really just not that big of a deal. But it can be if you ride a lot of off-road and you do a lot of technical trails, it can be. If you have a bike with fenders, it can start to become problematic. Let's say if you're bike commuting to work and you have to do a lot of stops at stop signs and you have to steer a lot to get going, then toe overlap could be an issue. And so the low trail bikes help to eliminate that toe overlap. So that's one of the main reasons. The other reason I mentioned being that the front load, a low trail bike handles a front load better. So most of the bikes that do the low trail setup generally have some weight on the front. They have a handlebar bag, they have a headlight, they have that front fender on there, they have the dynamo hub, they have the fatter tires. So all those things help to slow the steering down a little bit. So it's being compensated by that extra weight on the front. So when I got my custom bike made, I have a low trail bike with the fenders, the dynamo, the front rando bag and rack and all the stuff. And so I have that bike. I got that bike built 2 years ago and I've been riding it now for most exclusively that bike for the past 2 years. And I have since put on it almost 15,000 miles. And so I've gotten I think anyway, I've gotten a real feel for how that low trail handling is, what it does good and what it doesn't do that well. So then this bike came and I was really excited to try this because it has higher trail. The trail is around 58 or 59 millimeters compared to 32 millimeters, which is what my low trail bike is. So almost double the trail on this bike. And what I've noticed now in being able to go back and forth between these two is I can get a real feel for the difference. It's hard to know the difference unless you jump back and forth, because you will get used to the low trail. If you ride it long enough, it becomes normal feeling. This becomes different feeling the moment you get on it. You realize, wow, the trail feels different. The handling, the steering feels different. And so what do I like about the high trail, and what is it kind of illuminated for me? I think that one of the things that became most obvious to me was when I was actually riding on a flat, straight road. With this bike, even with the handlebar bag on it, on a flat, straight road, it just goes straight. There's no micro inputs needed. It just goes straight. You point it, it goes straight. There's not a lot of shoulder movements or micro adjustments or micro inputs that are necessary. You can just sit on the bike, pedal, and it basically does the work of steering for you as long as you stay centered on the bike. So that's very relaxing, actually. And it's very relaxing, especially on a long ride when you start to get tired. You don't have to micromanage the bicycle. Whereas I feel like you do have to micromanage the bicycle more when you have that lower trail, even with the weight on the front, even with the handlebar bag, there's still more micromanagement going on. And so I find that I was able to relax a little bit more, keep my shoulders down, and just ride on a straight road and not be thinking about how am I going, am I steering, am I getting moved around. The other thing I've noticed is that you don't get pushed around as much by the wind. Now, that was one of the first observations I made when I first got my low trail bike. I was blasting down the Highway 1 and a crosswind, and I remember getting a really sudden gust of wind, and it shook me a little because it moved the bike faster than I've ever felt before. And it was actually on a wheel set that doesn't have a very deep dish to it either. So it was a fairly typical tire. It wasn't like I was riding deep dish carbon rims that were like a sail in the wind. This was just normal riding stuff. So I've since been more careful when I ride in the wind to pay attention and hold on really well to the handlebars, because you can get that movement. Now it's not a real big, it's not a deal breaker, but it is something that you need to be aware of. The other probably really big difference between the high trail and the low trail is that when I was riding Sunday, I was doing a single track climb, and I felt that I could, when it came to riding uphill, when it was loose and a little bit rocky, the bike didn't get pushed around as much. It didn't get, pushed off its track. It stayed, on the line that I wanted it to stay on. And so again, it required less micromanagement from me, and I was able to just, go around the corners really fast. I was able to just keep that line going, get a little bump from a root or a rock. It didn't just throw me off line or, quickly snap the front steering or anything. It just kept it going nice and straight. And so I really liked that. Now, of course, this has bigger wheels. These are 700C by 48s. So there's also a little bit of that inertia effect happening here as well. That bigger wheel has more inertia, and so it's not going to get perturbed from its line as easily as a smaller diameter wheel will. And with the lower trail, then you have a combination it's going to get bumped around more. So I noticed that was really interesting. Aside from that, those two things, I can't say that there was really anything other than that. The head tube angle on this bike is very similar to a road bike, so it has a similar kind of wheel flop and similar, riding no hands feels a little bit different, but you get used to it right away, and I really like it. So I'm going to do a toe overlap example here with this bike, because I didn't mention that. Well, there was something I didn't mention, and that is that toe overlap doesn't always occur even on a high trail bike. So with this bike, I just want to show you what the overlap is so you can get a sense of it. Okay, so you can see where my toe is, right? And you can see where the tire is. And there's maybe, if you're pointing your toe down, you could get a little bit of toe touch on the tire, but normal pedaling, you're just not gonna touch the tire here, which is really cool. So this has a 50 millimeter offset, remember. Now what you can do if you discover you have toe overlap, but you're only like 2 or 2.5 millimeters, you can always get a shorter crank, drop down, like let's say you're running 175s, you could get 172.5s, or you could go, say you're at 172.5, you go to 170, but of course you'll raise your saddle a little bit. And although that doesn't sound like much, you will feel it a little bit. So, some things to think about. Maybe just get a fork with a little bit more offset. And then you're not gonna feel the steering change by that much, and yet you might avoid toe overlap. You could also get a smaller tire, but I mean, if you can fit the tires, I'm in the camp of, if you can fit the biggest tires you can fit on your bike. Just, that's where I'm at. And there will be a limit to where that occurs with most bikes because of the drivetrain clearances and all those things. Hello. Legends. Some legends out here today riding. All right, well, okay, that's it. Those are my thoughts. I'm sure I'm gonna forget something, but those are my thoughts on high versus low trail. And the last thing I was gonna mention before we go is I'm gonna talk a little bit about just the knobby tires on paved descents. So these are the Renaers Knobby 48s, and there's been some, you know, I've been curious about how they will handle on a really fast road, a pavement descent, and how they handle around the corners. Do they feel really loose? And so far, I can say that I can corner as fast as I can with slicks. They do have a slightly different sensation on the road. You feel the knobs a little bit more. They do sound louder. You can feel the knobs actually. It's not the same as a slick, but it does handle the corners just fine. So I went around some sharp hairpin paved corners when I was coming down the highway on Sunday, and I really tried to, you know, take them as hard as I felt safe to do. And the traction was fine. I never felt like I was on a mountain bike, you know, and I was feeling like I'm starting to skip a little bit around the corner. It just took the turn fine. And so these tires, at least with knobs, handle the pavement pretty well, but they do not feel as smooth as a slick. I want to make sure I say that because I don't know if I've heard anybody really point that out. Like, they do not feel the same as slicks. I rode these with slicks. I rode this bike with slicks, and it's a smoother ride on the road for sure. So it doesn't feel so much slower, but it does feel different. There's more of a rumble to it, a little more of a vibration to it. But that's the trade-off if you're looking for good off-road traction and you still need to ride on the pavement to get from one dirt section to the other. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that at the end because I know maybe some of you are curious. I think somebody was curious actually in the comment section, you know, what I thought of these. And they do feel good. They feel fairly fast on the road. I haven't checked the numbers to see exactly if they're the same, but they feel more or less similar. And they are good off-road. They're really fast on gravel descents. I got a couple of top 10s, and I did that on purpose. I know I was being kind of risk taking, but I did try to descend some faster dirt descents on these to see. And I got a couple of top 10s on those in the Strava app, which was cool. But I don't recommend doing that. It was definitely taking chances, and I was also on a road where there were people walking and hiking, and so I had to slow down a few times. So I think I could have got the KOM, but you know, it's all because of those dog walkers that I had to watch out for. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, but yes, there were people, and I was trying to be cautious of others out there, but I still wanted to see, you know, what are the limits of these tires on gravel, and so I pushed it as hard as I could. And I'm still here to tell the story. So anyway, so this is going to conclude part 3. I'm just going to keep these rolling. We're going to have more parts on more specific topics as they come. I don't know where the end is, but if you guys keep asking good questions and more interesting questions and topics come up, I'll add to this. So again, I want to thank all of you for watching this channel. I appreciate all the great comments, all the thoughtful comments, and we'll see you in the next video.